This is not an oil tanker. It's not a container ship. Stacked across 16 decks, sealed inside the single vessel, are more than 9,000 electric cars. They were built in China. They are headed to Europe, to South America, to markets that American and European car companies spent 100 years building. This ship has a name, BYD Shenzhen. It belongs to a car company most Americans had never heard of 5 years ago. Today, that company sells more electric vehicles than Tesla. So here's the question this video is going to answer. What happens when the company Elon Musk once laughed at, on camera, becomes the company Tesla can no longer ignore? In 2011, a Bloomberg reporter asked Elon Musk what he thought about a Chinese battery company that had just started building electric cars. Its name was BYD. Musk laughed, on camera, for several seconds. Then he said it plainly. "Have you seen their car? I don't think it's particularly attractive. The technology is not very strong." At the time, that wasn't an unreasonable thing to say. Tesla had something no one else had, a charismatic founder, a Silicon Valley brand, and a 5 to 10 year head start on building a real electric car company from scratch. BYD, meanwhile, was a battery manufacturer that had bought a failing state-run automaker and was building boxy, forgettable sedans for the Chinese domestic market. For over a decade, that gap looked permanent. Tesla defined what an electric car was supposed to be. Everyone else, Chinese automakers included, was trying to catch up. Then something changed, and it didn't happen with a flashy product launch. It happened quietly, inside battery labs, factory floors, and supply chains that almost no one outside China was paying attention to. Here's what most people still don't understand about BYD. It never set out to be a car company. It started in 1995 making rechargeable batteries for cell phones. Only later did it acquire a struggling automaker and start building cars around the batteries it already knew how to make. That order of operations matters enormously. Tesla started as a car company and had to build its battery expertise around that. BYD started as a battery company and built the car around the battery. That single difference in origin is arguably the reason the two companies now compete so differently. Today, BYD doesn't just assemble vehicles. It manufactures its own battery cells, its own electric motors, its own power semiconductors, its own onboard software, and, increasingly, its own ships to export all of it. Very few companies on Earth, in any industry, control that much of their own supply chain. This is the part of the story that rarely makes it into American headlines. BYD isn't simply a Chinese Tesla. It's closer to a vertically integrated industrial conglomerate that happens to build cars, the way a steel company might also own its own mines. And in an industry where the two biggest costs are batteries and semiconductors, owning both of those pieces yourself is not a minor advantage. It might be the whole game. Now here's the number that should genuinely concern Western automakers. In China, BYD's smallest electric car, the Seagull, sold in Europe as the Dolphin Surf, starts at roughly $10,000. Not $10,000 after incentives. $10,000, full price, brand new, with a driving range over 300 kilometers, and on the newest models, a self-driving sensor system that used to be reserved for luxury vehicles. There is currently no American or European electric car that comes close to that price. Tesla's cheapest vehicle in the United States starts tens of thousands of dollars higher. Even accounting for labor costs, safety regulations, and shipping, that gap is difficult to explain by economics alone. Part of it is scale. Part of it is subsidy history in China's EV sector. But a large part of it is something more structural. BYD builds its own batteries and its own chips, and it manufactures at a volume that spreads its fixed costs across millions of vehicles a year. This is the uncomfortable question the entire Western auto industry is quietly asking itself. If a company can sell a genuinely functional electric car with real range for $10,000, what happens to every business model built around $40,000 EVs? Price isn't a side detail in this story. It might be the whole story. To understand why BYD can hit that price point, you have to understand what's inside the car, specifically a battery BYD calls the Blade battery. Most electric cars use nickel-cobalt-manganese battery chemistry, which packs more energy into less space but carries real fire risk if the battery is ever punctured or short-circuited. BYD instead builds around lithium iron phosphate chemistry, cheaper, more thermally stable, and because cobalt is one of the most expensive and geopolitically fraught materials in the battery supply chain, significantly less exposed to price shocks and mining bottlenecks. BYD's engineering innovation was arranging these cells into a thin, blade-like shape and packing them directly into the battery pack without the usual module housings, increasing usable space by more than 50% compared to a conventional LFP pack. BYD has published nail penetration tests, driving a steel nail straight through a charged battery to simulate a serious crash. In those tests, conventional nickel-based batteries burst into flame within seconds, reaching over 500 degrees Celsius. BYD's blade battery penetrated the same way, produced no smoke, no fire, and a surface temperature you could hold your hand against. That's not just a safety story, it's a cost story. A battery this stable requires less thermal management hardware, less shielding, less insurance risk, and cheaper materials. And BYD controls the entire chain that produces it, from raw lithium processing to the finished pack. In an industry where the battery can be 40% of a car's total cost, the company that owns the battery technology holds enormous leverage over the company that merely buys it, which brings us back to that ship. For most of BYD's export history, it depended on chartering cargo space from other shipping companies, an expensive bottleneck as exports grew. So BYD built its own fleet, starting with the BYD Explorer, #1 in January 2024, which could carry 7,000 vehicles. BYD has since launched 8 of these car carriers. The newest, BYD Shenzhen, can hold over 9,200 vehicles across 16 decks. At the time of its launch, the largest car-carrying ship ever built. Together, this fleet gives BYD the capacity to move more than 1 million vehicles a year without depending on anyone else's shipping infrastructure. Think about what that actually means. This isn't a company exporting a product. This is a company that decided the global shipping industry itself was a choke point it didn't want to be dependent on. So it built its own solution. That's not how car companies have historically behaved. That's how nations behave when they're building strategic infrastructure. Ships get the attention because they're visually dramatic, but the more consequential story is happening on land, because BYD isn't only exporting finished cars anymore. It's building the factories. The clearest example is Brazil. In 2023, BYD broke ground on a massive industrial complex in Camaçari, in the state of Bahia. Built notably on the site of a former Ford factory that closed in 2021 and laid off thousands of Brazilian workers. The complex includes 3 separate plants, one assembling electric buses and truck chassis, one assembling passenger vehicles, and one processing lithium iron phosphate, the raw material for BYD's own batteries, using Brazil's own mineral resources. The investment totals roughly $1 billion. Initial capacity is 150,000 vehicles a year, expanding to 300,000, and BYD has set a public target, 50% locally sourced components by the start of 2027, with a goal of becoming Brazil's best-selling car brand outright by 2030. Why does this matter more than a simple export deal? Because once a factory is built inside a country, using that country's own labor and increasingly its own supply chain, it becomes far harder for that country's government to simply tariff the problem away. Tariffs are designed to block imports. They are far less effective against a factory that already employs thousands of local citizens and pays local taxes. And Brazil is not an isolated case. BYD has announced or opened manufacturing operations across Thailand, Hungary, Turkey, Indonesia, Uzbekistan, and Pakistan. And by 2025, it had outsold Tesla in Germany and the UK, all while remaining formally banned from selling directly in the United States due to tariffs exceeding 100%. The strategic pattern is consistent. Enter a market with exports, then convert that market into a manufacturing base before political resistance has time to build. It's a slower, less flashy strategy than a single dramatic product launch. But it may be far harder to reverse. So where does this leave Tesla? Tesla still holds real advantages. Its brand recognition remains unmatched. Its supercharger network is the most extensive fast-charging infrastructure in the world. Its self-driving software, whatever its limitations, remains a genuine area of technical leadership. And Elon Musk, for all his controversy, still commands a level of global attention no car executive on Earth can match. But look at the numbers from the last 2 years, and a different picture emerges. In 2025, BYD's global battery electric vehicle sales grew 28% to 2.26 million units, while Tesla's deliveries fell nearly 10% to 1.64 million, Tesla's second consecutive annual decline, and the first time any automaker had ever outsold Tesla in pure electric vehicles for a full year. Tesla clawed back the lead in early 2026, but the margin was thin, and BYD's overseas exports, not its China sales, were the fastest growing part of its business. That's the deeper problem. This was never a contest Tesla was destined to lose on brand, or software, or charging infrastructure. Tesla is losing ground on the most unglamorous variables in the entire industry: manufacturing cost, battery supply chain, and sheer production scale. Those are exactly the variables BYD spent 30 years building its entire company around. The real question isn't whether Tesla can out-engineer BYD on any single feature. It's what happens when Tesla's core advantage, simply being years ahead of everyone else, quietly stops being true. So back to that title, what exactly did Elon Musk say was impossible? To be fair to Musk, he never said on the record that BYD specifically could never compete with Tesla. What he actually said evolved dramatically over 13 years, and that evolution tells the story better than any single quote could. In 2011, he laughed at BYD's cars and openly doubted the company would even survive in its own domestic market. By 2023, after a video of that laughter resurfaced online, Musk responded publicly, "That was many years ago. Their cars are highly competitive these days." And by January 2024, the same quarter BYD outsold Tesla globally in electric vehicles for the first time. Musk went even further on Tesla's own earnings call. "Our observation is generally that Chinese car companies are the most competitive car companies in the world. If there are no trade barriers established, they will pretty much demolish most other car companies in the world." That's not a man who was wrong about BYD's potential. That's a man who dismissed it, watched it prove him wrong, and then admitted, twice on the record, that the company he'd once laughed at had become something close to unstoppable if the West's own tariff walls ever came down. The impossible thing BYD did wasn't beating Tesla in a single quarter. It was forcing the most confident person in the entire electric vehicle industry to publicly reverse a decade of his own certainty. Zoom out, and this stops being a story about two car companies. The technologies at the center of this competition, batteries, power semiconductors, vehicle software, precision manufacturing, are not limited to cars. They are the same technologies that underpin energy storage, grid infrastructure, robotics, and defense-adjacent industries. Whoever manufactures these components at the lowest cost and the largest scale doesn't just win market share in one product category. They gain leverage across an entire industrial base. That's why Western governments have responded not with silence, but with tariffs. The European Union's anti-subsidy duties on Chinese EVs and United States tariffs exceeding 100% that currently keep BYD out of the American market entirely. Those barriers are real, and they are working in the narrow sense that BYD still cannot legally sell a car on an American dealership lot. But tariffs are built to stop imports. They were never designed to stop factories. And factories are exactly what BYD is now building in Brazil, in Hungary, in Turkey, inside the borders of the very markets those tariffs were meant to protect. Tesla spent the last 15 years convincing the world that the future of the automobile was electric. That was by any measure one of the most consequential bets in industrial history, and Tesla won it. But somewhere in Shenzhen, a battery company that Elon Musk once laughed at was paying very close attention. And it drew a different conclusion. It didn't need the most famous CEO. It didn't need the most futuristic product launch. It needed to control the batteries, control the factories, control the ships, and then send all three at once to every market Tesla had spent a decade building.